I'm Emily Carter, 32, the daughter always expected to give more, while my brother Derek was handed everything and still claimed it wasn't enough. Tonight, under the glow of chandeliers and the smell of roasted turkey, I finally see it clearly. Our family table was never about food. It was about sacrifice. Mine. Every holiday, Derek is crowned the victim, the fragile one we must protect, while I'm reminded that my steady job and empty chair beside me mean I have no excuse. My father speaks of duty, my mother pours him another glass, and cousins nod along as though loyalty is measured by how much of myself I give away. But this Thanksgiving, the script shifted. My father called on me to step up. My mother slammed her hand against the table, and Derek smirked as they branded me with a single word, ungrateful. The word didn't just sting, it cracked something open. Ever been told you owe your life to someone else's mistakes? Hit like if you've ever carried the weight of a sibling's failures. Comment if you've ever been called ungrateful for finally saying no. Because for me, it began here at a table set with turkey and buttered casseroles, where the word family became the sharpest weapon of all. I adjusted the napkin on my lap and forced a smile toward my aunt across the table, her earrings catching the glint of the chandelier above us. Laughter rippled from one corner as cousins clinked glasses of apple cider. But underneath it was a rhythm I knew all too well, the subtle scrape of silverware, the loaded pauses, the way my father's eyes scanned the table like a judge, waiting for the trial to begin. I sat stiffly, already bracing myself. Derek leaned back in his chair like a king who'd lost his crown but still demanded loyalty. His shirt hung loose, his cheeks pale, and yet everyone doted on him. Plates were passed toward him first, words softened when directed at him, and every sigh from his lips was met with maternal concern. My mother kept reaching to refill his glass, her bracelets jangling as if to underline the performance of her devotion. I cut into the turkey breast on my plate, chewing slowly, hoping maybe the focus would drift somewhere else. But soon enough, my father cleared his throat, a sharp sound that silenced even the cousins bickering over pie. His fork tapped once against his plate. "Emily," he said, tone deceptively calm, "we need to talk about Derek's situation." The words dropped like stones. My stomach coiled, but I lifted my gaze, feigning patience. "What about it? He needs more support," my mother interjected quickly, eyes narrowing toward me as if the responsibility were self-evident. "He can't manage everything on his own, not after what he's been through." I looked at Derek. He smirked faintly, not even bothering to act grateful. He'd always been good at playing helpless when it suited him. My jaw clenched. "I've already done a lot," I said carefully, measuring each word, hoping restraint might shield me. "But it's not enough," my father countered, his voice firm, each syllable heavy with expectation. "Family means stepping up, especially when one of us is struggling. You're single, no kids, steady job, who else can shoulder this?" A heat rose in my chest. They said it so simply, as if my life were disposable, as if my independence were merely a resource to prop up his failures. Around me, relatives nodded in agreement, murmurs of assent tightening the noose. "Don't you think it's unfair?" I asked, my voice trembling not with weakness but with fury. "Every time, it's me. Always me. And what has Derek ever done to change?" My mother's eyes flared, her lips pulling taut. "He's your brother. You owe him." "No," I whispered, louder than I intended. "I don't owe him my life." The silence that followed was electric. Knives hovered above plates, no one daring to breathe. Then Derek laughed, a cruel chuckle, shaking his head as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "There it is," he muttered. "Ungrateful Emily. Always thinking she's above us." I felt the sting pierce deeper than I wanted to admit, but I kept my back straight. "I've worked for everything I have," I said, my voice rising now, unrestrained, "and I won't throw it away because he refuses to grow up." The room erupted in gasps, forks clattering against plates. My father glared as if I'd spat blasphemy in church. My mother's face twisted with outrage, her hand trembling above the table. Then, sharp as a gunshot, her palm slammed down, rattling the silverware. "Ungrateful, that's what you are," she shouted, voice echoing off the dining room walls. Her face reddened, and tears welled at the edges of her eyes, but they weren't tears of hurt. They were tears of fury. Everyone stared at me as though the word had branded itself into my skin. Ungrateful. The label hung over the table like smoke, choking me, staining the air. I swallowed, pulse hammering in my throat, my hands balled tight under the tablecloth. In that silence, I felt the weight of years of obedience, of sacrifices never acknowledged, of nights spent fixing Derek's mistakes while being told it was my duty. Something in me cracked then, but it wasn't surrender. Maybe this time, I won't forgive. Shame follows you home in silence, heavier than any leftovers. I carried it with me up the stairwell of my building, my boots echoing on the concrete steps, the plastic container of turkey slices and mashed potatoes digging into my palm. I could still feel the heat of the dining room, the way everyone's eyes had pinned me down like insects on a corkboard. Even here, in the supposed privacy of my apartment, their voices clung to me, my mother's sharp accusation, Derek's mocking laugh, the collective silence that condemned me without a word. I tossed the container onto the counter without bothering to refrigerate it. The smell of roasted meat seeped through the lid, turning my stomach. I paced the narrow space of my living room, replaying every moment of the dinner. The word ungrateful repeated in my skull with the cruel persistence of a metronome, keeping rhythm with the thud of my heartbeat. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, screen lighting up before I even touched it. A new message. Derek, you embarrassed Mom tonight. Another bubble appeared before I could reply. If you want to make it right, prove you're still family. I need you to cover my rent this month. Consider it loyalty. I stared at the words until they blurred. Anger surged through me, sharp and clean. He had no shame. Not only had he watched me get condemned at the table, he'd weaponized it before the night was even over. My hands trembled, but not from weakness. It was the fury of years compressed into a single moment, pressing to be released. The phone buzzed again, another demand from him. Don't ignore me. If you cared about family, you'd help. You know you have the money. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound startling in the quiet room. I dropped onto the couch, pressing the phone against my thigh, fighting the urge to scream into the empty walls. The screen lit up once more, but this time the name made me exhale in relief. Sarah, my best friend. Hey, I answered, voice rougher than I intended. Em? Her tone was gentle but steady, like a rope thrown to someone drowning. I just got your text from earlier. Are you okay? I rubbed my forehead. Thanksgiving turned into another circus. They called me ungrateful, in front of everyone. A pause. Then her sigh carried across the line, heavy with empathy but not surprise. They've been using that word to keep you in line for years. You don't owe them your life, and you definitely don't owe Derek your paycheck. He just texted me. I admitted. Wants me to cover his rent. Says it's proof I'm still loyal. Sarah scoffed. Loyalty isn't the same as servitude. He's not your responsibility. If you give in now, he'll never stop. He'll just keep knocking until there's nothing left of you. Her words settled deep, echoing truths I'd avoided. I leaned back, closing my eyes. My thumb hovered over the glowing conversation with Derek, his demands stacked like weights on my chest. Sarah's voice softened. Delete it. Delete him, Em. You'll breathe better. I hesitated, the part of me conditioned to keep the peace screaming against it. But then I remembered the slam of my mother's hand on the table, the laughter Derek hadn't bothered to hide. Something shifted inside me, small but unshakable. With one long breath, I held my thumb over the screen, and then I tapped. The thread disappeared, the history of his manipulations vanishing into digital ash. For the first time all night, the silence in the apartment felt like mine. I set the phone aside, chest lighter, a fragile relief, blooming in the space Derek had occupied for too long. But before the calm could settle fully, a sound cut through the quiet. A knock firm, insistent at my door. I froze. My heart pounded as I rose slowly, steps cautious against the wooden floor. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see Derek standing in the hallway, bags in hand, his silhouette waiting like a shadow determined to invade. A knock at the door, Derek standing with bags in hand. Betrayal doesn't always storm in, it drags a suitcase. The wheels of Derek's battered duffel thudded against the hallway floor as I opened the door. He gave me a lopsided grin, the kind that used to get him out of trouble as a teenager, but now only made bile rise in my throat. His coat was unzipped, shirt wrinkled, face pale but smug, as if arriving at my doorstep at midnight with luggage was the most natural thing in the world. Don't look so shocked, he said, brushing past me before I could even speak. It's temporary, just until I get back on my feet. You know family helps family. I stood frozen by the door, the cold draft from the hallway fading as it clicked shut. His words replayed, each one a brick added to the wall, pressing down on me. Temporary. I'd heard that before. And family helps family had become his license to steal years of my time, my energy, my dignity. Derek dropped his bags on the living room floor and immediately made himself at home, peeling off his jacket and tossing it across the back of the couch. He didn't ask if he could sit. He didn't ask if he could stay. He just did. I didn't say yes, I managed, though my voice was quieter than I wanted. He leaned back, smirking as he stretched his legs out onto my coffee table, shoes leaving faint streaks of dirt. You didn't say no either. Come on, Em, don't be difficult. You owe me. After all that drama you caused at dinner, Mom's still upset. If you had any conscience, you'd make it right by helping me. My chest tightened. You owe me. The words slammed into the old wound from earlier, the label ungrateful burning again in my memory. Derek rose and wandered toward the kitchen, opening my refrigerator without hesitation. He pulled out the container of leftovers I hadn't bothered to put away and stabbed a fork into the turkey. Perfect. Saves me from grabbing takeout. That's my food, I snapped. He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth, and shrugged. Our food. At least while I'm here. Don't be so territorial. Then he chewed loudly, savoring each bite as though marking territory with sound. I pressed my lips together until I tasted iron. Anger built, but I shoved it down. For now, I needed control. Later that night, while Derek sprawled across the couch as though it were his throne, I retreated into my bedroom with my journal. The words poured out of me, trembling across the page. He's not here to stay. I won't let him. I underlined it twice, as though the pressure of ink could anchor my resolve. From the living room came the hum of the television, something cheap and loud that rattled through the walls. Derek's laugh followed, sharp and grating, echoing into the corners of my sanctuary. I pressed the pen harder, imagining the paper tearing under my insistence. At some point, I must have dozed off. But I woke later, the apartment heavy with silence. A strange shuffle broke through it, a sound not from the television or couch. My pulse quickened. I slid from bed quietly, the floorboards creaking under my feet. In the dim light of the hallway, I saw him. Derek, crouched by my dresser, one drawer already pulled halfway open. His fingers dug through my things, the faint metallic clink of jewelry striking each other making my stomach twist. He froze for a moment, then rifled deeper, his shadow looming against the wall. You'll thank me later for letting you do the right thing, he had said earlier, smug and certain. And now here he was, proving just how temporary his stay would never be. I held my breath, gripping the doorframe, dread rising like a tide I could no longer stop. My father didn't call me home, he cornered me at work. The December wind cut across the parking lot, carrying the sting of salt and exhaust as I crossed toward my car. The day had already drained me, spreadsheets and meetings pulling what little strength I had left after nights of Derek's occupation in my apartment. But the sight of my father leaning against the hood of my car froze me more effectively than the winter air ever could. He stood straight, coat buttoned, face composed with the same calm mask he wore at church services and community events. Only his eyes betrayed the purpose of his ambush, steady, cold, unyielding. I hesitated, my keys digging into my palm, before forcing myself forward. Emily, he said, his tone clipped, almost rehearsed. No greeting, no warmth, just my name as though it were an accusation. Dad, what are you doing here? My voice trembled with the weariness I hadn't meant to show. I waited, he replied, nodding toward the office building behind me. You don't answer calls anymore. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant rumble of traffic and the crunch of gravel under my boots. I swallowed hard, bracing for what would come. You've been avoiding your family, he said, stepping closer. That's not how we raised you. Family stands together. Family sacrifices. His eyes flicked, sharp, searching for weakness. Your mother told me about Thanksgiving, about the shame you brought into our home. Shame. The word dripped with the same venom Linda had used at the table. My stomach knotted. I didn't bring shame. I shot back. I refused to carry Derek's failures on my back. That's not shame, it's self-respect. His jaw tightened. Self-respect? You sound like them. He spit the word with quiet disgust. Outsiders. People who don't understand blood. We are not like them. We look after our own. I felt the wind burn my cheeks, but the fire inside me outmatched it. Looking after our own doesn't mean letting him bleed me dry. You know what he's like. He's been given every chance. Robert's hand rose, not to strike, but to silence. Enough. Derek is my son, your brother. He's family. You, Emily, you are my daughter, if you remember what that means. Something inside me cracked. His calm authority, once the anchor of my childhood, now felt like chains tightening around my throat. So because I won't bankroll him, I stop being your daughter? His gaze hardened, breath visible in the cold air. He leaned closer, voice low, final. If you don't help your brother, you are no longer my daughter. The ultimatum landed like a verdict. My chest constricted, but there was no room left for pleading, no strength for bargaining. I looked into his eyes and saw not a father, but a judge who had already signed the sentence. The keys bit deeper into my palm as I steadied myself. My voice came out colder than the night itself. Then you've already lost me. His face flickered, the mask slipping just enough to reveal a flash of something shock or anger, or maybe the faintest wound. But I didn't wait to study it. I unlocked my car with a sharp click, slid inside, and closed the door. Through the windshield he remained a figure carved in stone, unmoving against the glow of the parking lot lights. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, but I started the engine, the roar breaking the silence that bound us. I drove away without looking back, the severed thread of daughter and father whipping loose behind me, never to be tied again. Then you've already lost me. Sometimes salvation comes with the sound of a broom sweeping leaves. The rasp of bristles against concrete echoed down the narrow hallway, mixing with the muffled hum of a heater that struggled against the winter chill. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I climbed the last flight of stairs, my shoulders sagging beneath the weight of another long day. Another night knowing Derek was sprawled across my couch, demanding and consuming like he owned my air as well as my space. The familiar scent of detergent and faint cinnamon greeted me when I turned the corner. There she was, Rita. Silver hair pulled back, glasses perched low on her nose. Broom in hand, though snow had followed us inside days ago. She swept, like she had a purpose greater than tidying up slush, as though every stroke kept chaos at bay. "Evening, Emily," she said, pausing her steady rhythm. Her voice carried warmth, the kind that reminded me of classrooms and patient lessons. "Long day?" I nodded, forcing a small smile. "You could say that." Her eyes, sharp despite her years, flicked toward my apartment door. "Your brother still visiting?" The word hung awkwardly, sugar-coated but heavy. I let out a breath, bitterness writing each syllable. Visiting implies an end date. He's turned my place into his personal den, and he doesn't even try to hide it anymore. Rita leaned on her broom, lips pressing together like she weighed whether to say more. Finally, she sighed. "I've seen him, lounging in the hallway when you're gone, smoking, talking loud on his phone. It unsettles the other tenants. Frankly, it unsettles me." Her candor pricked at me. It wasn't just in my head, wasn't just me being overly harsh. I thought it was only behind closed doors. God, he's spreading it everywhere. She tapped the broom handle against the wall, the hollow knock underscoring her words. "Emily, he's not just lazy. He's dangerous. There's a kind of recklessness in his eyes I've seen before, in boys who thought rules didn't apply to them. You need to protect yourself. Dangerous!" The word rattled inside me like loose change, heavier with each echo. I wanted to argue, to insist Derek was only pathetic, but the memory of him rifling through my drawers at night sliced through my denial. My skin prickled. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Start keeping records. Every detail. Dates, times, words. Trust me, you'll need it." I stared at the glowing screen, Sarah's advice dovetailing perfectly with Rita's warning. For the first time since this spiral began, the fog of helplessness began to thin. I wasn't powerless. I had eyes, ears, memory, and now I had allies. I turned back to Rita, managing a genuine nod. "Thank you. Really, I think you're right. It's time I stop waiting for someone else to fix this." Inside my apartment, the stale warmth pressed down. Derek's shoes kicked in the middle of the rug, his jacket tossed across my chair as if marking territory. But I didn't react with the same defeated sigh. Instead, I strode to my desk, flipped open my laptop, and opened a new folder. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the decision solidifying into something unshakable. "Fine," I whispered to myself, each letter I typed carving resolve into the silence. "I'll build my own case." The folder blinked back at me, crisp and undeniable. I typed the title in bold letters, "The Case." The moment I pressed save, it felt like more than a digital label. It was the beginning of a war fought on my terms. If they wanted a caretaker, I'd become a record keeper instead. The words crystallized in my head on a frigid January night as the wind howled against my apartment windows, rattling the glass like impatient fists. My living room glowed with the bluish hue of my laptop screen. Papers scattered on the coffee table, grocery receipts, unopened envelopes, Derek's crumpled notes demanding money. For weeks I had drowned under their voices, their accusations. Tonight, I wasn't drowning. I was archiving. My fingers moved fast, clumsy at first, but steadier with each click. Screenshots of Derek's texts, lined up like soldiers. You owe me. Cover rent or you'll regret it. Another read, family means sacrifice. Don't be selfish. I copied them into a folder on my desktop labeled The Case. Each saved file felt like a bead threaded onto a cord, stringing together the narrative they had tried to bury under guilt. The family group chat blinked at me, full of subtle digs disguised as obligations. My mother's sharp words, my father's cold affirmations, Derek's pitiful pleas morphing into entitlement. I took them all. Evidence wasn't just what Derek did, it was what the whole family condoned. My phone buzzed with Sarah's name flashing across the screen. I answered on speaker, her voice crisp against the silence. You're doing it right? Screenshots, timestamps, everything. Yeah, I murmured, dragging each file into neatly labeled folders. Texts, calls, witnesses. It feels strange, like I'm spying, but it's my own life. Sarah chuckled, but there was no humor. It's not spying, it's self-defense. Back up everything. Don't just keep it on your laptop, upload to the cloud. Make it impossible for him to erase. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, following her instructions. A second drive. An encrypted folder. Passwords that only I knew. Each layer of security felt like a wall, protecting me from the chaos lurking in my own living room. A knock broke the rhythm. Soft, deliberate. I cracked the door and found Rita standing there, bundled in her winter coat, cheeks flushed from the wind. She carried a thermos and the sharp look of someone who knew more than she said. I won't stay long, she whispered, glancing down the hall. But you should know he hassled Mrs. Alvarez on the second floor this morning. Said she owed him for carrying groceries. He didn't carry anything, just blocked her doorway until she gave him $20. My stomach twisted, anger rolling through me. He's spreading his rot to everyone. Rita's eyes softened, though her jaw stayed firm. Document it. Neighbors will talk when the time comes, but write it down while it's fresh. You'll need every piece. I scribbled her words into a notebook and later typed them into the witnesses file. Each keystroke made me bolder, my fear calcifying into determination. Hours bled by, the clock sliding past midnight. My apartment was still, except for Derek's faint snores from the couch, oblivious to the empire of truth I was building against him. I leaned back, staring at the glow of the screen, and whispered into the hum of the heater. If they want proof, I'll give them proof. The sound of footsteps broke my focus, heavy, unsteady, too close. My heart thudded as the door to my room creaked open. Derek filled the doorway, eyes squinting against the light, hair mussed but suspicion sharp in his expression. His voice cut through the air like a blade. What are you hiding? Sometimes the smallest spark makes the biggest crack in glass. That thought pulsed in my chest as I sat across from Sarah at a cramped corner table in the coffee shop near my office, steam rising from 2 untouched mugs. The cafe hummed with chatter and clinking cups, but I felt cocooned, every nerve focused on the tiny device in my hand. My thumb hovered above the screen where Derek's drunken voicemail sat, raw and ugly, a slurred mess of curses, demands, and the damning line. She'll cave. She always does. She's too weak to fight me. Sarah leaned in, eyes bright with a mix of caution and thrill. Are you ready? She whispered, as though we were plotting a heist instead of sharing a voicemail. My mouth was dry. It's just one piece. Just a scratch in the mirror. I pressed play. Derek's voice oozed through the speaker, loud enough for Sarah but masked by the cafe noise. She flinched at the cruelty packed in his tone, then gave me a slow nod. This is more than a scratch, she said. This is leverage. I sent her the file with one decisive tap. It felt like crossing a line I could never return from, but instead of regret, I felt lighter, like exhaling after holding my breath for years. Sarah didn't hesitate. I know exactly who to send this to first. She forwarded it to our cousin Lisa, who had always lived in Derek's shadow, but never trusted his charm. Within an hour, my phone buzzed. Family group notifications exploded in rapid-fire succession. Is this real? Derek? What were you thinking? Disgusting. My father's silence loomed, but the others swirled in disbelief, confusion, and judgment. For once, it wasn't me under their microscope. It was him. Derek's name lit up my screen, a string of missed calls and frantic texts. What the hell did you do? Delete it now. You'll regret this. I turned my phone face down and let the vibrations rattle against the wood. Then came the inevitable. My mother's call, her name glaring like a warning siren. I answered, steadying my voice. Emily, what have you done? Do you realize what you've started? You're tearing this family apart. You think humiliating your brother makes you righteous? Her voice cracked with rage and fear, the kind she usually reserved for outsiders. I didn't flinch. No, Mom, this is just the beginning. The words surprised me with their calmness, with the steel laced beneath them. I almost smiled at the silence that followed, a stunned breath before she hung up. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You've just shifted the balance. They can't unhear that. They can't pretend he's spotless anymore. My notifications chimed again. A new message blinked from an unexpected name. Mark, the cousin who always lingered at the edge of gatherings, quiet, observant, invisible. His text was short, but it sent a chill of anticipation through me. You're not the only one with stories about Derek. Power doesn't fade, it fights dirty when cornered. That truth burned itself into my skin the moment I stepped into the church basement. The fluorescent lights hummed above, reflecting off the tiled floor, and casting everyone in a washed-out glow that felt more like a courtroom than a family gathering. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and every face turned to me the instant I entered an audience already convinced of my guilt. Linda stood near the center, hands clasped tightly, as if she were orchestrating something sacred. Her smile was brittle, forced, the kind of smile people wear before dropping a blade. Emily, she said with saccharine sweetness, thank you for coming. We thought it was time to clear the air. The air was anything but clear. It was thick with judgment, buzzing with whispers. Cousins glanced at me, some curious, some hostile. Derek sat slouched in his chair, shoulders hunched forward, eyes cast down like a scolded child. An act so rehearsed it made my stomach churn. His hands fidgeted with the zipper of his hoodie, the perfect prop for a performance of vulnerability. Robert was the first to strike. He rose from his chair with an air of solemn duty, voice calm but edged with steel. Your mother and I are heartbroken, Emily. What you've done sharing private things, humiliating your brother, it isn't just cruel, it's destroying the unity of this family. Unity. That word again, twisted into a weapon. I clenched my fists in my lap, nails pressing half-moons into my palms. Derek sniffled loudly, his cue to step into the spotlight. I don't know why she hates me so much, he said, his voice quivering in just the right places. I've always loved her. All I've ever wanted was a little support while I get back on my feet. But instead, she made me into a laughingstock. My own sister. His head dipped, shoulders shaking. I half expected him to peek through his fingers to check if his performance was working. Linda moved closer, her voice rising like a preacher's sermon. You see, Emily? Do you see what your bitterness has done to your brother? To all of us? We can't let this continue. We're here today because we love you, and because we want you to come back to your senses. You can still fix this. Apologize. Delete those recordings. Promise to help him. The walls pressed in, their voices layering over one another. A chorus of guilt and shame. I could feel the trap tightening, the careful staging, the watchful eyes, the manipulation dressed up as love. It was all meant to corner me, to make me crack. But I had cracked before, and from the pieces, I'd built something harder. I rose slowly, letting the chair scrape against the tile. My voice came out steady, sharper than I expected. Unity isn't slavery. The words cut through the murmurs, hanging in the stale air like smoke. You don't get to demand my silence and call it love. You don't get to use family as a leash. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered under their breath. Another cousin shifted uncomfortably. Linda's face flushed deep crimson. Robert's jaw tightened, and Derek finally lifted his eyes. The mask slipped, just for a second. His glare was raw, venomous, stripped of all pretense. He leaned forward, lips barely moving, and whispered low enough for only me to hear, "You'll regret this." The sound of shattering glass doesn't ask for permission. It ripped me out of sleep, my heart hammering before my mind could catch up. The storm outside had already made the night restless rain battering the windows, wind howling down the narrow alley beside the building. But this was different. A sharper, violent sound. Then came the pounding. My door rattled on its hinges as fists crashed against it again and again. I scrambled out of bed, the floor cold under my bare feet, pulse screaming in my ears. "Emily, open this damn door!" Derek's voice slurred with rage, thick and commanding. "You think you can shame me and just hide? You owe us everything." Another slam, harder. The frame shuddered. I froze, clutching my phone, torn between fear and fury. Then I heard another voice, Linda's sharper, more desperate, just outside. "Derek, stop. She'll open if you just give her a chance. Don't make her call the police. Emily, baby, please, let's talk." Her pleas were hollow, rehearsed. They weren't here to talk. The next crash came like thunder, and glass splintered from the small decorative window on the door. Shards scattered across the entryway tile, glittering like ice. Derek's hand forced its way through the gap, groping for the lock. I stumbled backward, adrenaline flooding every nerve. Across the hall, a door creaked open. Rita's voice, hushed but firm. "I've got this recorded, Emily. Don't open that door." I glanced through the peephole. She stood in her doorway, phone held steady. The red glow of recording light aimed squarely at the chaos unraveling outside my apartment. Derek's face pressed close to the fractured glass, eyes wild. "You think you're better than me? You think you can humiliate me and walk away?" Spit sprayed with his words. His knuckles bled from the pounding, streaks staining the white paint. I forced my trembling fingers to unlock my phone. The keypad blurred as I dialed 911. My voice cracked, but I kept it level enough. "There's a break-in attempt. My brother is trying to force his way into my apartment. He's breaking the glass. He's screaming at me. I need help now." The operator's calm tone barely cut through Derek's roars. Linda's voice surged, frantic now. "Derek, stop, please! She's calling the police!" But he only screamed louder, punching the door, veins bulging in his neck. Another boom. More glass rained down. I backed deeper into the apartment, the phone pressed to my ear, whispering to myself, steadying my breath. My whole body shook, but anger threaded through the fear, sharp and grounding. I would not let them win this way. Then came the distant wail, the high-pitched cry of sirens, slicing through the storm. It grew louder, closer, flashing blue and red bleeding against the rain-slick windows. For a heartbeat, Derek froze, his face twisted, caught between rage and panic. "This isn't over," he snarled, yanking his hand back through the broken glass. His footsteps pounded down the hallway, retreating into the night as the echo of sirens closed in. The police officer's pen scratched louder than Derek ever had. Each stroke across the lined paper echoed through the small, sterile room, steadier than my own heartbeat. The police station smelled faintly of coffee gone cold, metal filing cabinets, and wet wool coats, January's storm still clinging to everyone who walked through the door. I sat rigid in the hard plastic chair, the fluorescent light buzzing above me, my hands clenched together on the desk as if I were holding myself still by force. Officer Martinez glanced up, his eyes sharp but not unkind. He had a square jaw, dark hair peppered with gray, and a tone that suggested he had heard every story before. Yet he didn't rush me. He let me speak, let the silence stretch when I faltered. Rita sat just behind me, her phone clutched like an artifact, the recording ready for evidence. She had walked with me here, her presence steady and unyielding in the face of my shaking nerves. I replayed it all, the pounding fists, the broken glass, Linda's pleas, Derek's voice spitting venom through the shattered door. Martinez didn't flinch, didn't sigh, or scribble, absent-mindedly. He wrote as if every word carried weight, and for once, someone treated it as if it mattered. Rita slid the phone forward across the desk. "I filmed everything," she said. "You'll see her brother trying to force his way in. You'll hear him yell." Martinez plugged in the device, the faint sounds of Derek's rage filling the quiet office. I had to look down at my hands to keep from breaking eye contact with the memory. He watched, jaw tightening, then exhaled slowly. "This will shake things up," he said finally. "He's not going to like having something like this on record. But it's good you came in. This isn't something you let slide." The warning settled in my chest like a stone. Shake things up. It meant escalation. It meant that I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was retaliating, formally, legally. The shift felt terrifying, but also liberating. Martinez pushed the report across the table, his pen resting on top. My name was already printed at the top of the page. The lines of text below were my story, condensed into official language, stripped of emotion, but still mine. "Sign here," he said. I stared at the space, waiting for my signature. My hand trembled for a moment before I steadied it, pressing the tip of the pen down with deliberate force. Each curve of the letters, each stroke, was a declaration. I would not let them erase me. When the ink dried, I exhaled long, shaky, but freer than before. That night, back at my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table. The broken glass had been swept, the door patched with temporary plywood, but the scars still lingered in the air. My phone buzzed on the table. One new message. "Derek, you'll pay for dragging cops into this." The words glared back at me, darker than any shadow in the room. A hospital's silence can squeeze the truth out of anyone. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion, the pale walls lit by fluorescent tubes that never dimmed. Machines beeped in steady rhythms, nurses moved like shadows, and every sound, every sigh, every footstep seemed louder in the vacuum of waiting. I didn't want to be there. If it hadn't been for Rita's firm voice on the phone, "Go! You don't have to forgive him, but you have to see what he gives away when he's weak," I would have stayed home with my locked door and my folder of evidence. Derek lay half reclined on the hospital bed, a tangle of IV tubing running from his bruised arm. His face looked swollen, one eye discolored from the fall. The nurse whispered about drunk, stumbling down icy stairs. Linda perched at his bedside like a sentinel, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth, while Robert stood rigid near the wall, arms crossed as though he were carved into the sterile plaster. I hovered in the doorway, uncertain, unwelcome, yet unwilling to leave. "Emily," Linda said softly, her tone flat but sharp beneath the surface. "Your brother's hurt. You came good. Maybe you'll remember what family means." I ignored her. My eyes stayed on Derek. His lids fluttered, his breath rasping with the heavy weight of sedation. But when his gaze focused on me, the familiar bitterness stirred. "You." His voice was rough, like glass dragged over concrete. "Always the golden child. Always the one with the straight A's, the trophies. But useless when we actually needed you." The words struck, not because they were new, but because they were old worn grooves etched into me since childhood. I clenched my fists at my sides, pulling my phone from my pocket as though simply checking the time. Instead, I slid the recorder app open, thumbs steady despite the storm inside me. Derek coughed, a ragged laugh breaking through. "You think you're smart, building your little case. You think you can make me the villain. But you—" He broke off, swallowing hard. Then muttered, "I was never meant to break the door." His voice lowered, gravel thick with something raw. "But Mom told me to." Linda froze, her hands stilled on the cloth. Robert shifted, his jaw tightening, but he didn't speak. The silence roared louder than any shout. My pulse hammered as the recorder caught every syllable. I lowered my gaze to mask the flicker of triumph that threatened to show. "Derek," Linda whispered quickly, pressing his shoulder down as if to anchor him. "You're confused. Don't say things you don't mean." But it was too late. The words had already fallen into my phone, permanent, undeniable. My chest ached with the weight of revelation, with the sharp edge of vindication. For once, Derek's drunken looseness was not a liability, it was my weapon. I slipped into the hallway before anyone could demand answers. The ER's hum enveloped me again, but I hardly noticed. My fingers trembled as I typed, the message short and electric, carrying everything I couldn't yet say aloud. He just gave me everything I needed. I hit send to Sarah, and for the first time in months, I let myself breathe, as though the war might finally be tipping in my favor. I returned to the table, but this time I brought evidence instead of excuses. The church hall smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, its long folding tables lined in neat rows where the community gathered for meals and meetings. Tonight the air was different, thicker, tense, charged with expectation. People whispered as I walked in, heads turning, eyes curious and sharp. The echo of Thanksgiving, the same family gathered, the same unspoken demand for loyalty pressed against me. But I wasn't the same woman who had flinched under that weight. This time I carried files, recordings, and truth. Linda sat near the front, lips tight, hands folded in practiced piety. Robert stood beside her, broad shoulders stiff, his expression the familiar mask of disappointment. Derek lounged a few seats away, his smirk forced but still present, as though he believed the crowd would protect him the way it always had. Rita waited quietly at the end of the table, her small frame steady, eyes kind but unyielding. Cousin Mark hovered near the back, shifting nervously, while Sarah squeezed my arm as she guided me forward. Linda's voice cut the murmurs. My daughter thinks she's wiser than her family. She drags us through the mud instead of honoring her blood. Look at what bitterness has made her, Robert added coldly. Emily destroys unity for the sake of pride. She'd rather betray her brother than lift him up. Their words rose like a script rehearsed too many times. I felt the old ache tug, but I pressed my folder flat against the table and looked up. Number. I came here because silence has been the real betrayal. Not mine, yours. Gasps rippled as I opened the laptop. With a click, Rita's shaky video filled the small projector screen. Derek's fists pounding on my door, Linda's voice sharp behind him, glass cracking, my frantic call to 911. The hall erupted with whispers. Derek sat straighter, his face paling, his smirk fading. Before he could speak, I played the next file. The voicemail, his slurred threats, words dripping with entitlement. You owe us everything. Linda's composure cracked for the first time. Her hands trembled as she tried to hush the crowd. And then, I said, my voice steady, though my chest burned. There's what he confessed when he thought no one was listening. I hit play. Derek's groggy tone filled the room. I was never meant to break the door, but Mom told me to. The silence was total, crushing. Rita rose, her broom-calloused hands clasped in front of her. I saw it. I've lived across from Emily for years. Derek has harassed neighbors, stolen packages, and bragged about it in the hallway. She's not lying. Mark's voice followed, shaky but resolute. He scammed me too. Asked for money, promised he'd pay it back. Never did. I stayed quiet out of fear. Not anymore. The walls themselves seemed to tremble under the weight of truth. Derek leapt to his feet, face blotched red, eyes wild. Shut up, all of you! You think you're so righteous? I never asked to be borne your burden. His scream tore through the hall, raw, desperate, self-condemning. The elders stirred, people shifted uncomfortably, and the whispers turned into a wave of gasps. Robert, once unshakable, lowered his head at last, his broad shoulders sagging as though the air itself had betrayed him. I stood taller, heart hammering but unbroken, watching the mask of our family crumble in the open. The silence after Derek's scream felt endless, and in that silence the weight of years shifted. When masks fall, the silence cuts sharper than screams. The house I had grown up in felt smaller when I walked through the door, as though its walls were caving in on themselves. Curtains that once framed proud Sunday mornings now hung heavy, hiding from curious neighbors. The family photographs lining the hallway no longer glowed with polish. They seemed like relics of a myth no one believed anymore. I could hear the dull hum of the refrigerator. The creak of the old floorboards sound sharper in the void left by the collapse of our family's facade. Derek sat in the living room, shoulders hunched, scrolling aimlessly on his phone. His smirk was gone, replaced by the hollow glare of a man cornered by his own lies. Every so often, he cursed under his breath, swiping at the screen as though messages would appear to absolve him. They didn't. I had heard from Cousin Mark that most of Derek's friends had blocked him, group chats once filled with inside jokes now silent. The relatives who had once defended him suddenly discovered their distance. Linda moved restlessly around the kitchen, her steps uneven. I knew her church friends had stopped answering her calls. The women she used to gossip with now crossed the street instead of waving. When I caught her eye, she looked older than she ever had, her face etched with something she couldn't conceal with lipstick or polite laughter. Robert stayed seated at the dining table, pretending to read the paper. He hadn't shaved in days, and when the neighbor's car door slammed outside, he flinched as if expecting confrontation. I didn't come here to gloat, though temptation pressed hard against my ribs. I had spent nights envisioning this, seeing them diminished, stripped of their thrones of guilt and manipulation, but in truth, the scene was almost pitiful. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a somber kind of relief. I realized I didn't need to keep fighting them. They were fighting themselves, tearing their own foundation apart. Derek finally broke the silence, his voice jagged. You think you've won? Everyone's turned against me because of you. You wanted this, didn't you? I stayed by the doorway, arms folded, my breath steady. Number, they turned against you because they finally saw you. That's all. He scoffed, tried to laugh, but it cracked in his throat. He slammed his phone onto the couch, muttering, "Pathetic liars, all of them." But he wasn't convincing anyone, not even himself. Linda's footsteps slowed until she stopped at the counter, gripping it with both hands. Her voice wavered as she spoke, eyes fixed on the floor. "You've ruined us all." The words trembled, not with righteous fury, but with the collapse of everything she had built her identity upon: her image, her authority, her grip over the narrative. I let the pause stretch, the silence enveloping us like cold mist. Then, clear and sharp, I replied, "No, you did." The words landed like stones dropped into a still pond, their echoes rippling through the room. Robert lowered the paper but said nothing, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond me. Derek slumped deeper into the couch. Linda shook her head slowly, as if shaking off water, but no excuses came this time. I turned toward the door, knowing I no longer needed to argue, to defend, or to explain. The truth had already done what I could not. Their collapse wasn't my victory, it was their consequence. And for the first time in years, I stepped back into the cool March air without carrying the weight of their silence on my shoulders. Grief doesn't erase betrayal, it only frames it differently. The morning of Aunt Denise's funeral broke clear and sharp, the first blossoms of spring pushing against the chill that lingered in the air. The churchyard was small, tucked between willow trees whose branches bent low, brushing the ground like mourners themselves. I stood at the edge of the gravel path, clutching a bouquet of white lilies, their fragrance piercing in the crisp April air. People gathered in slow clusters, their voices hushed, their coats buttoned against the breeze. Cousin Mark spotted me first, his eyes softening as he crossed the yard. He pulled me into a quick, earnest embrace, no words, just the warmth of acknowledgement that I wasn't invisible anymore. Behind him, Rita waved gently, her posture steady as ever, the old teacher who seemed to see through the mess of lives with the patience of someone who had lived long enough to know patterns. Sarah leaned against the stone wall near the church steps, offering me a quiet nod, her loyalty a silent anchor. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like an intruder at a family event. Some of the relatives who had turned their backs shifted uncomfortably when I passed, but there were brief nods, small gestures, tiny cracks in the ice. A few muttered words of condolence that felt almost like respect. Not full acceptance, not yet, but enough to mark a shift. The service was simple, hymns rising and falling, the pastor's voice steady as he spoke of Denise's generosity and quiet strength. I remembered the times she had pulled me aside at holidays, slipping me small notes of encouragement or whispering that I was stronger than I knew. She had never raised her voice in family squabbles, never chosen sides out loud, but her presence had always felt like quiet resistance against the tide. When it came time for the eulogy, my hands trembled as I walked to the front. The paper I had folded in my pocket suddenly felt too heavy, so I spoke without it. My voice was steadier than I expected, carrying through the wooden rafters of the church. I stand here not only mourning Aunt Denise, but honoring her gift of truth. She taught me that dignity is not in silence, but in knowing when to draw boundaries. In the hardest moments, she made me believe I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was. She believed in me, even when no one else did. And for that, I will always carry her with me. A rustle moved through the pews, some shifting, some clearing throats. But I didn't let myself falter. I ended with a steady breath, bowing my head before stepping down. Rita caught my eye, nodding with approval, and Sarah reached for my hand as I slid back into the pew beside her. At the graveside, the early blossoms trembled in the wind as the coffin was lowered into the earth. I leaned forward, placing the lilies gently on the polished wood. My lips barely moved as I whispered, "Thank you for believing me when no one else did." The earth answered with silence, the kind that pressed down but also released, a paradox of weight and relief. When I lifted my head, I noticed her. Linda stood at a distance, just beyond the churchyard fence, her black coat blending into the shadows of the trees. Her face was unreadable, no tears, no visible anger, only a mask I couldn't decipher. She didn't step forward, didn't join the circle of mourners, she simply watched. And in that moment I realized closure didn't come from her, or from Robert, or even Derek. It came from me, from the boundaries I had drawn and the truth I had chosen to live in. Still, her presence lingered like a shadow against the bright bloom of spring, reminding me that some battles end not with peace, but with silence. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter. I was the woman who refused to be erased. The words formed in my mind before I even opened my laptop. The apartment was hushed, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound against the early spring dusk. Through the window, pink light from the setting sun stretched across the city, washing the buildings in a kind of softness that felt foreign after months of sharp edges and storms. I sat at the table where the case folder had been born. The folder still glowed on the desktop, a digital vault of screenshots, voice memos, videos, every shard of proof I had carried like armor. I opened it, scrolling through file names that once kept me awake at night. Derek's rants, Linda's threats, the glass breaking, the confession in the hospital bed. Each one was a reminder of who they had tried to make me, and of who I had become by refusing. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. I thought of how tightly I had clung to these records, as if they alone could keep me safe. But safety had shifted. Proof was no longer what I needed to breathe. Peace was. With one steady breath, I highlighted them all, pressed delete, and emptied the trash. The screen went blank, the folder gone. Not out of fear, not to silence myself, but because I didn't need them anymore. They had served their purpose. I had survived, and I had changed. The phone rang. Sarah's name lit the screen, her voice carrying warmth even before I answered. "I heard about the funeral," she said softly. "You've made it through, Emily, and you didn't lose yourself in the fight." I closed my eyes, smiling faintly. "For the first time, I feel like I found myself," I replied. "Not who they said I was, but who I chose to be." She laughed gently. "Then you've won. That's what matters." Later, I walked to the park a few blocks away. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and damp soil, a quiet promise of renewal. I sat on a worn wooden bench, the city lights flickering on around me, the evening cool but not cruel. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched, judged, or haunted. I just felt present. Pulling my journal from my bag, I let the pen glide over the page, the words clear and steady. Ungrateful? No, I was grateful I chose myself. I closed the journal with finality, leaning back as the night deepened. For once, silence didn't ache, it soothed. When I returned home, an envelope waited by the door, slipped through the mail slot. My name scrawled in a hurried hand across the front. I tore it open, expecting another bill, maybe a note from work. Instead, a single page unfolded, the handwriting familiar yet distant. "Emily, there are things you don't know about our family. We should talk." No signature, just the faint outline of a name I recognized, a cousin I hadn't seen in years. The paper trembled in my hand. Peace had come, but secrets still lingered in the bloodline, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of uncovering them. Betrayal had carved deep wounds, but truth stitched them back stronger than before. In the end, the schemes that once held power crumbled in the light of courage and evidence, leaving dignity to rise from the ashes of manipulation. When injustice is met with unwavering resolve, justice may come late, but it never comes empty. Its echo lingers long after the verdict is heard. Like shattered glass that can no longer be pieced together, lies cannot endure against the tide of truth. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt the same strength in Emily's fight, or 2 if you think the ending could have gone another way.